Good morning, Slack Pack. Jack Slack here. It's Wednesday and it's 9 a.m. and I apologise for being so late with the podcast this week. I have been, as we say over here in the UK, up to my tits. Very busy week for me. But excuses aside, let's get into analysing some fights. We'll do some news afterwards, but I expect anyone who's here, who's not one of the regulars, is here to listen to what we think about the important upcoming fights. So we'll dive right into it. Rafael dos Anjos versus Tony Ferguson is the highlight of the weekend. Could well be the highlight of the year in terms of fighting. That is one of those stylistic matchups which has every chance of being just a blood and guts war from start to finish. Both men will be given Lifetime Achievement Awards for outstanding contribution to the field of violence. What I said earlier in the week in my article at Fightland, which you should go and read, was that we're dealing with two different types of pressure fighters. Because pressure is a very nebulous term. A lot of times when I talk about pressure, I mean footwork and the pressure of punches that don't actually come. Pressure is something that's felt by the opponent. It's not so much a tangible thing that a fighter can apply. It's more a creation in the opponent's mind. But you do that. Well, the guys that I really appreciate as pressure fighters do that with their footwork, with the constant threat of punches coming. Not necessarily the punches that are coming, but the ones that aren't there, that force the overreactions, that force the opponent to lash out in panic when he gets too close to the fence, that force the opponent to shoot panic takedowns, things like that. And that's really how Rafael dos Anjos goes about it. He's a Chris Weidman-style pressure fighter. Cut in the ring, taking his time, and the pressure's there, but he's not running after the opponent. Whereas Tony Ferguson is a guy who doesn't really cook guys so much as drag them into the fire with him. He sprints out at the opening bell, and he drags the pace up on his own. Whereas Rafael dos Anjos is making the opponent move, making them try and get away from him. Tony Ferguson is trying to stay on top of the opponent and keep them panicking, and keep them active by dragging the rate of activity up himself. Tony Ferguson is a lot more active with his attacks than Rafael dos Anjos is. Rafael dos Anjos is a very patient pressure fighter. So two types of pressure both have the same effect of exhausting the opponent. One is a little bit harder on the gas tank of the guy applying it, and it could be said to have a lot more openings. But with Rafael dos Anjos' style, the patience style of pressure fighting, the danger is that because you are the main thing that a pressure fighter has in the traditional pressure fighting mold is his presence. He's using his presence to affect the opponent and scare them and make them move and panic. The problem with your presence being your main attribute, or the main part of your plan, is that you have to be there the entire time to be hit. So you have small slips like that one against Eddie Alvarez, which cost him the title. His left hand is always dragging a little bit. He does it a lot, especially off of his long left hook to the body, the wide left. He'll drop it low on the way back. But, dos Anjos' left hand was a little bit out of position, didn't move his head quick enough, got clipped behind his guard, and put on Wobbly Street. I miss saying Queer Street. I'm going to say Queer Street again. Put on Queer Street. No one's going to be offended by that, It's an old expression. It reminds me of when I got an email. I got a few emails, actually. I wrote an article called Alexander Gustafsson, Coming of Age in a Dogfight. That was immediately after the John Jones fight. And I think it was Joe Rogan said that was a dogfight. And a lot of people got upset because they thought I was condoning dogfighting, as in the Michael Vick style or Gerald McClellan style, encouraging of dogs to fight. No, it's a common expression. Everyone knows what a dogfight is. There's a position in jiu-jitsu called the dogfight. If you've never seen two dogs fight outside of an instance of animal cruelty where they're encouraged to, you haven't been outside enough in your life. Anyway, rant over about political correctness, and don't even get me started on chink in the armour, which is a great phrase, but somehow became conflated with a racist phrase, and now you can't use that, and you have to call it a gap in the armour, which just sounds shit. Anyway, the PC squad. No, I'm not normally like that about anything, but I do. It does annoy me when people get offended by a word which has two meanings, or is not even referring to the thing that they're upset about, and they're like, well, careful, you saying dogfight could make children go out and buy dogs and force them to fight. Anyway, Back to RDA and T-Ferg. Dos Anjos obviously coming off that loss to Eddie Alvarez. It was just a small slip in his... Well, to be fair, Eddie Alvarez was doing fantastic work in that bout. He was circling the ring beautifully. He was getting off the fence. The little bits of infighting along the fence. Eddie Alvarez's right hook is his favourite punch. Not an awful lot of great right hookers in MMA. You got guys with good overhands and things like that, or great right straights. But the right hook is a closer in punch. Sergei Haratonov is one I think of, but not too many. That were close in right hook. It was a favourite of Roberto Duran. Used to go to the body wonderfully with it. He'd jab and then, anticipating the return, he'd duck his head low and get offline and throw back the right hand. And 9 times out of 10, the guy would jab back at him, so he'd be getting opened up ribs on that left side to hit with his right hand. If you want to see that in action, go watch. To be honest, any Duran fight, but Iran Barkley, Davey Moore, both of those terrific examples. Now, the thing that everyone wants to know is when will Tony Ferguson's strategic decisions catch up with him? And by that, most people think the crazy spinning elbows and rolling out of disadvantageous positions, full-on roly-poly style. And I don't think those are going to be as much of a problem as his ring positioning. If you look at the front rolls against Josh Thompson, they serve the same purpose as a Granby, which is a terrific technique, especially from standing, because you get so much. You got some weight behind it and some momentum, so you can drive all the way through. As opposed to if you're Granbying from the knees, where you can't really always get all the way through, you can get stuck on your own shoulders and dragged back. Getting into Ray Carson's stuff there, very good book. Go buy that. Actually, this is one of the reasons that I was really interested in that Khabib Nurmagomedov Tony Ferguson matchup. If you watch Khabib versus Abel Trujillo against Abel, Abel was able to roll out of a few of Khabib's back body locks, which are normally like death. He'll grab onto that, and that's the rest of the round. You're going to get thrown to your knees every time you try and get up. But what he'd do is work his way up, and then he'd, as Khabib would try and throw him back to the floor, he'd Granby through, and Khabib would lose control of him. Very similar to what Ryan Hall teaches as the hippopotamus on his open elbow DVD. And Nick Diaz was attempting that against George St. Pierre in that fight where he spent the whole time going to the turtle rather than trying to play guard. If you can roll underneath your opponent's elbow, if they've got their arm across your back as if they're holding a body lock, or if they're trying to hold a spiral ride or something, if you can open that elbow as you roll through, you can really destroy their positioning and often come out on top in like a front headlock or something. But yeah, so Tony Ferguson's weird combat rolls were basically just an application of that, his hips coming over the top, ruining any grip the opponent was trying to take around his waist. And that would have been interesting against Khabib, because Khabib did adapt to that against Trujillo, against Abel. But one of the things I'm really interested in going into this fight is how Ferguson's ring positioning is going to affect it. If you watch his fight with Barboza, or Thompson actually, both excellent examples of that pressure, driving the pace up really high, never letting his opponent get going. It really ruined Barboza, because Barboza likes time and space to kick. He's a master of time and measure, and a cracking counterpuncher. But if you never get time to get your eye in and you're distancing, and that distance is constantly being closed, it really can throw off a guy like that. And of course, you can't really kick very well while you're retreating. You can fade back and kick, but that is something where you have to be able to control the distance. You can't simultaneously retreat rapidly and kick, because you have to take one leg off the ground and stand still to kick. But what kept happening in both those bouts was that Ferguson would, he was more focused on chasing than cutting the ring, and he'd throw a big powerful strike and go straight past his opponent onto the fence, and then he'd come out off the fence and continue chasing them. I think if he does something like that against Rafael dos Anjos, who loves the fence, he loves to put people on it, that's the sort of thing where dos Anjos, the moment Ferguson goes past him and gets too close to the fence, dos Anjos is going to be in on his hips and trying to take him down, or swinging at his body and head. So that is one thing that Rafael dos Anjos has over Ferguson. He's much more disciplined in his ring position. He is very, very rarely, except when he's hurt, past the center of the octagon. He's always got his back to the center of the cage and the opponent between him and the fence. Also interesting is that Ferguson's style of boxing is very accurate, very long punches, because he's a gangly guy for lightweight, which also helps with the Darces and things like that. But he does make his punches do loop a little bit, and he tends to drop his non-punching hand, his passive hand, which is great if you've got a longer reach than the guy, or if you've got them covering up, as most of his opponents are by the time that he's really getting to work with combinations. But against a guy like Rafael dos Anjos, who's so good at rolling behind his shoulders and moving his head and coming back with counter combinations and things, that's going to be tricky, especially as dos Anjos loves to crowd guys. So, you throw a couple of missed punches at him, he's going to be already on top of you and attacking your body. So I'm really interested to see if Ferguson can keep him on the end of the range as opposed to giving up his own range. Though one of the things that mitigates the disastrous nature of giving up range, giving up your reach advantage in MMA, is elbows. If you watch John Jones, he can comfortably fight in another fighter in a much shorter fighter's boxing range because that's his elbow range. Tony Ferguson, terrific elbows, can be a bit wild with them, always drops his non-striking hand. And, if you watch the ones against Thompson, he's throwing these elbows and he's like looking off in the direction that his body's turning. Really reckless with them sometimes. In the Barboza fight, he opens Barboza up with an intercepting upward elbow, beautiful stuff, and then immediately steps in and gets elbowed again as he drops his hands, attempting another elbow. In the space of about 3 seconds, both of them open up big cuts on the other, which bleed profusely. But I really like elbows against for the fighter facing the pressure fighter. A really good pressure fighter is not going to be fazed by a couple of punches in the face. This is what we were talking about in Killing the Queen, Ronda Rousey. We were saying that a lot of these female bantamweights are loading up on their right hand, thinking, I'll get the job done, and all they're really doing is giving away the clinch. But if you are going to try and intercept someone with a punch coming in and make it a good one, the elbow is a fantastic alternative. Firstly, because it's a big shard of bone, and it doesn't require you to swing it very hard. You can just put it in their way, and there's a good chance you'll cut them open. And a cut is a lot more valuable against a really strong, forward-moving, aggressive pressure fighter than maybe wobbling them once is. Because if they're going to get on top of you anyway, you can wobble the guy and then they clinch or run away or move their head well enough to stay alive for however long. You get hit in the head, that's gone in a while. But you get elbowed in the head and split open, the blood's in your eyes for the rest of the fight. And I think that's something that could be very valuable to Ferguson, trying to open up the cuts early on dos Anjos. Because we've seen him cut before, he's not a guy like Anderson Silva or Henderson where it's very hard to cut them. And to be fair, Anderson Silva and Henderson haven't eaten a lot of really good elbows. You can cut pretty much anyone, it's just skin. Just some guys are a lot more susceptible to cutting on, just regular punches and things like that. Fedor had skin like a newborn babe. I think one of the decisions that I'm really looking forward to seeing whether it plays out or not, and I think this will affect decisions for a lot of fighters to come, is Ferguson's decision to build his camp around himself as a professional boxer would. At the highest levels. He has a place up on Big Bear, and he's if you've seen Mastering the System, which is a brilliant little documentary come conspiracy theory advertisement come instructional video series that's being carried on by Eddie Bravo on his website. Well worth watching, especially because it gives you a lot of backstage information on the Eddie Bravo Invitational and things like that, and he's always doing cool stuff. But Eddie Bravo's up there now training with Ferguson. And they're like training on mats in this garage. And then they show you around Ferguson's camp. And he's basically built it around himself. He's got a Mukjang Dong, the Wing Chun wooden dummy. He's got his bags all set up. He's got a little cage in there. The guy is really like built the camp around himself. And he's got guys like Eddie Bravo and Eddie Bravo's students coming in to train with him and work on specifics of grappling. And I think that's a really smart way for, I'm not going to say that's good for everyone. There are a lot of fighters who benefit from being in that larger camp environment, training camp as in a group of people. But I think that the biggest fighters in the world should really be starting to think about, you can still have your friends at the gym, and but, pay people specifically to come in and work with you specifically for your fight. I think if Ferguson loses soon, a lot of people will be like, well, you can't do that in MMA. But I hope that people do start to look at this as a serious possibility. Apparently, Rafael dos Anjos left King's MMA. According to the Brazilian interview, apparently it was mistranslated. He hasn't left to set up his own gym. He's left to set up his own team, which could well mean that he's training on his own in like a self-running camp, as Ferguson is. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out. But I think it's a great decision by Ferguson to get Eddie Bravo in because of the rubber guard, the lockdown, all that unusual guard play, which can be... Well, it is underrated in MMA because there's not a lot of guys doing it well. If you watch Ben Saunders, when he got, whatever they call it, muddy waters or one of those locked up positions high in the rubber guard, and was just elbowing the crap. I can't even remember who he's fighting, but he was elbowing the crap out of their face. And if I was watching Mendes versus McGregor the other day, and Mendes was like shouting to the ref, he's elbowing me in the back of the head, because he was just so upset with being elbowed in the top of the head. And Herb Dean was having to say, stop complaining, it's the top of the head, that's legal. Good elbows from the guard are a big deal. And if you can tie a guy up in rubber guard and free one arm to elbow him in the head, that's brilliant, even if you're not working for submissions. But I think an offensive guard is a good investment for Ferguson. I mean, he had a little bit of trouble against Danny Castillo, but the thing about Dos Anjos is that he's shut down some high-level traditional guard players. Anthony Pettis, very good guard. Nate Diaz, very good guard. But each time that he got those guys on their back, that was basically the rest of the round. He was like, nope, we're here now. He's happy to strike on the feet and beat people up there with the long left round kick and the wide left of the body and the right hook. But as soon as he's decided it's the right time to shoot in on their hips on the fence, he's one of those guys that's like, cool, rest of the round we're spending in your guard. And he doesn't really care that much about passing. He's happy to just wail on dudes. He's a big lightweight and a strong hitter and a strong grappler. So you want to see Ferguson coming up with something to get off his back, or at least something more interesting to attack with if he gets stuck there. One thing that Ferguson does that I would be really interested to see against Rafael dos Anjos, because I've seen glimpses of this working against dos Anjos in the past, and that's the front snap kicks to the body. Ball of the foot, the difference between a snap kick and a teep, we touched on this last week, snap kick or a push kick, is where the knee chambers, or the leg chambers. If you pull your heel in low and you're throwing the kick out as your knee comes up towards the line of the kick, that's a snap kick. If you bring your knee up first and then you uncoil it, that's a push kick. And this was a distinction we made last week with Gabriel Vargas versus Robin van Roosmalen. Robin van Roosmalen has a guard and a height that is perfect for being front kicked in the face, but snap kicked, not push kicked. You want to, bring the knee up through the blind angle and have it already uncoiling towards underneath his chin. Whereas Gabriel Vargas was picking his knee up and then kicking, and he gave this lag time that Robin van Roosmalen could just go, nope, that's not happening, and move his head out of the way. Yeah, the front kicks to the body were a huge deal for Ferguson against Josh Thompson. Winded him wonderfully in that fight. They work especially well along the fence. Going back to McGregor Mendes, the front snap kicks along the fence were a killer. And of course, they are one of the longest leg techniques into one of the hardest to guard targets. In most traditional guards, the solar plexus is largely unprotected. And to protect it, you have to give up something else. You have to bring a hand down. You have to bring an elbow in. You have to create openings in your guard. And then suddenly you're working on a game that you're not really used to working. It's the same as the body jab. It makes them adapt, except being hoofed in the solar plexus with a kick is a lot more painful than being body jabbed a couple of times. Except by a guy like Junior Dos Santos, So, I mean, that's a terrific fight. I can't wait for that. The ins and outs of that are just astonishing to think about. Ultimately means nothing until we get into the fight, but what you're going to see is disciplined ring technician against a guy who's going to try and fluster the shit out of him. If they both come in doing what they normally do. And this is what I was saying in my article. The interesting thing about these fights where both guys have not a similar sort of style, but a similar sort of principle. They both want to drive the pace the opponent is working at up and tire them out while coming forward. If they both try and do that, you've got a good chance of either getting an ugly clinch battle or a give no ground, blood and guts war. But sometimes those sort of fights are won when one man has said in his camp, I'm going to take a step away from this, I'm going to do the other thing. And he comes out dancing. And then the guy who's doing his usual thing is supposedly getting what he wants. He's the other guy's giving ground to him, but he's a little bit put off by it, and that's the mark of a really great fighter, being able to do not what they are normally doing when they have to. There is always going to be someone who's better at the thing you're great at than you, and if you can step away from that and adapt, that shows the kind of fight IQ that you need to be a great. Rest of the event, Diego Sanchez is fighting, but I really don't want to see Diego Sanchez anymore. He is very badly beaten up at this point, and when he does win a fight, it's by missing punches and making noise. I was looking at the stats for his BJ Penn fight the other day. It was something like 8 out of 108 strikes landed. He landed about 8. And it's because he kept throwing these like marching combinations and key-eyeing on every punch. He was just doing nothing. And his striking hasn't much moved past that. He relies on... Oh, it's like a Dan Henderson thing. He can hurt a guy if they come and fight the dumbest way possible. When Gilbert Melendez decided to swing with him, that was when Gilbert Melendez got hurt. If Gilbert Melendez had just thrown the 1-2s, moved around, fought more strategically, he'd have had an easy time against Diego Sanchez. Ricardo Lamas versus Charles Oliveira is a really good fight. Looking forward to that. Ricardo Lamas is fresh off the Diego Sanchez performance, and everyone's calling him a great striker, but really outside of the wheel kick and the very low kick, he doesn't do very much. His boxing is really not up to snuff for the most part. Beneil Dariush is fighting. He's always great fun. Another King's MMA product. Got that great body kick and great aggression. Not as defensively sound as Dos Anjos. Dos Anjos is a bit of an anomaly coming out of that camp. He's got the aggression, but he's so defensively sound on the way in most of the time. Whereas a guy like Verdum is he benefits from overwhelming guys with that aggression, but it's not nearly as fundamentally sound defensively. Joe Soto, always a fun guy to watch. Alex Agrasso, everyone loves her after the Inoue performance, and she is just a real cutie, and also a cracking fighter. Sam Alvey is top of the prelims, which is a weird position, but I think as he's a knockout artist, that's probably going to do a good amount for him to advertise him. But then you've got to wonder, everyone who has Fight Pass knows Sam Alvey already, so I would like to see him moving up the main card now, because he's a successful guy and he's knocking dudes out. He's also one of my boys, so I am biased in that sense, but it seems strange to keep him on the... I mean, obviously he's selling the Fight Pass prelims, but you'd think that they'd be wanting to try and make a star out of him with his power and his relative consistency. Then we got the Bellator card, and this is the first Bellator card in a little while that I've been really excited for. I do believe in giving the Bellator guys a hard time when they do stupid shit. If they're putting together fights that could get someone killed, I'm going to shit all over that, just as I would for the UFC. But when you're putting together fights like Liam McGeary versus Phil Davis, I am all over that. That's a brilliant fight. Liam McGeary is one of those guys where we kind of want to know if he's the real deal. Very much an anomaly in modern mixed martial arts in that he seems to be a guard specialist, and often like a bottom of side control specialist. I haven't really seen him take down the upper level guys, which is interesting, because he was taken down by Tito Ortiz, he was taken down by Emmanuel Newton. He's going to be fighting Phil Davis, who is a great wrestler. But I've always wondered, what if Liam McGeary is forced to stand with one of these guys? Because his striking hasn't looked great. If I'm honest, he looks sort of herky-jerky most of the time. But his ground game's so fluid that it often makes up for it. Things to watch out for in a McGeary fight, that Braulio Estima guard sort of thing, which he pioneered at, I think it was Abu Dhabi 2009, but he'll play with one knee shield inside the opponent's shoulder and one knee shield across their belly, as if he was escaping side control more than he was playing a guard. So he's got both feet on one side of the opponent, except that they are, he's got the shin across his belly and the knee in front of the shoulder, and from there, Estima will shoot reverse triangles, which is what Liam McGeary does. If you want to see that in action, go watch the Abu Dhabi match between Braulio Estima and Andre Galvao. Braulio Estima will let him into that position repeatedly, and it looks like Galvao's just like a pull of the leg away from getting to side control, but he's there for ages, just not really making much progress, which is rare for Galvao because he's such a good guard passer. McGeary also very good when the guy passes his guard. He'll bridge up, get the knee in, throw the other leg over the head, and then, there's that cheap armbar that you can get from there, but if the guy takes his arm out, that's when you can shoot that reverse triangle, which he's always getting. Very good with his triangles and his reverse triangles. From the triangle, he'll use the Americana, like he was cranking the shit out of Manny Newton's arm from within the triangle. That fight is just brilliant. If you want to see 10 sub attempts a minute, go watch that one. Just recently submitted Tito Ortiz with the reverse triangle just the same way. One of the things I really like about McGeary is he does what I call the Marilyn Manson side control escape, which is where you take the arm nearest your head, you push it up, and then you kick your legs up so that you're bent over almost knees to head, and you insert your leg inside their arm, and you basically roll out into a crucifix sort of position, or you can just drive them back and try and kick your legs through for a triangle or something like that. Jessica Penne did this in Invicta. It's often like a female escape because they have more, they're generally more dexterous and flexible in the hips and spine. But it's very interesting seeing a 6'4" light heavyweight do it too. If you want to know why I called it the Marilyn Manson escape, think back to those schoolyard rumours about Marilyn Manson's ribs. I think it was Elton John they used to say it about over here, but obviously slanderous anyway. Who else is on the card? Sada Ward, not bad. Brennan Ward, not bad. That should be a good fight. Marlis Kunin, who is, she's just one of my girls. I've had such a soft spot for Marlis Kunin for years. I mean, she's the second best featherweight ever. She's basically the only other person you'd be interested in seeing Cyborg fight, but she's already fought her and lost twice. Kunin lost to Cyborg, that is. Kunin is most of Cyborg's record. She's the big wins on that. But Marlis Kunin can fight at 135. She just doesn't like to. She can't be bothered or something. Maybe she just doesn't like cutting weight. But she has fought at 135 before. So when the second best 145er of all time is a 135er, kind of dumps all over your case for that being a viable division. There was a petition this week that got like 1,600 names on it to get the UFC to bring in the women's featherweight division. And firstly, they're an entertainment company. They're not going to bring in something that they don't think people will care about. Or that only 1,600 people will care about. But secondly, like with every other, like the low weight divisions and with the women's bantamweight division, those were developed outside the UFC. The WEC developed the low weight divisions. Strikeforce and various other promotions created the women's divisions. But women's featherweight is even Invicta is having a hard time putting that together. If Invicta puts together a killer featherweight division, the UFC can just buy that out whenever, but they just haven't. So, it's not something that is in danger of happening too soon. Paul Daly against Derek Anderson. I don't know much about Derek Anderson, but Paul Daly, a lot of people are going to say he looked like he'd lost a step against Lima, but Lima really had his number. Lima had trained to counter the left hook with the left hook. Every time Paul Daly loaded up, he got there quicker. It was a terrific performance by Lima, and that's why I'm so excited for that match against, is it Koreshkov, the welterweight champion? So excited for that. Sergey Haratonov is on the card against the 9-5 heavyweight. Sergey Haratonov, people still calling him like one of the well-rounded heavyweights and things like that. He's not really. He has a big right hand and a couple of interesting ways of using it, like to the body and the head. His Sambo game atrophied years ago. He used to train with Volk Han, so that was quite an interesting sort of team they had over there. But he's not been very good for quite a long time. He went to kickboxing for a while, and he could trouble some of the better guys with his power and his right hand, but he could never really check a kick either, so he had real trouble over there. And that's about it for really good fights on the Bellator card. A huge card. There's like 20 fights on here. Oh no, 16 fights on here. But some of them are between guys like Ed Ruth 0-0-0 and Mark Mangiardi 0-0-0, Tyrell Fortune 0-0-0, Cody Miskill 0-0-0. So not like top tier talent all the way down. You've got about 10 of these fights are between guys who really don't have a lot on their records. Well, certainly not a lot in the win column. Got Sarah Payant 1-3 against a debuting woman. But the top end of that card is well worth tuning into, so definitely do. Yeah, Phil Davis looked cracking in the... Was it Glory Dynamite, the tournament they had at it? Yeah, Phil Davis fought Manny Newton in the first round of that tournament, and that was the one where he was just like, Manny Newton is a tricky guy and a good wrestler, and Phil Davis just blew him out of the water. That was one where Newton was trying these slick Granbys and things, and Davis would just like post on his head and roll through with him. It was incredible. I'll pop a gif of that in the article I'm writing this week about that. But yeah, he eventually pulls Newton off the fence as Newton's trying to work up along it, and Kimura's him with with one of the hands that's posted on the floor. And then Francis Carmont got to because it's a tournament, so obviously the reserve is going to get to the final. It never works out like you want it to, or cleanly. So he knocks out Francis Carmont in the final, which was more sort of a freak occurrence, But it was nice. It was the sort of thing that you wanted to see, because Phil Davis has always had so little confidence in his striking, in his punching especially. He can always kick really hard, but he seems absolutely terrified to step in and punch. And by knocking out Francis Carmont on the feet, you hope that it'll have given him a little bit of confidence in that. And then Muhammad Lowell, he decisioned for the Bellator title. Oh no, it was a title eliminator, obviously, because Liam McGeary is the champion. Oh god, did they let Tito fight for the title? That's awful. Yeah, Phil Davis, very good at, he's almost like the Khabib school. He's very good at dragging people back down as they get up. A lot of people complained that his sort of submission record fell off after the Wagner Prado Anaconda choke. He had a load of decisions in the UFC after that. Everyone remembers the Tim Boetsch Kimura, the Mr. Wonderful lock. That was awesome. And the Anaconda on Alexander Gustafsson. Very rare for a fighter to have 2 Anaconda chokes on their record. I mean, even Big Nog only has 2. Yeah, one of the interesting things about this fight is that McGeary's not a fighter who fights his way back to the feet all that often. He's happy to play guard. When Tito Ortiz put him along the fence, he was happy to just keep working back to guard, throwing his legs over Tito's head, getting the knee in, looking for sneaky setups, get into those awkward positions where Tito would have to move, and then he'd snatch up a submission. Whereas if you look at Davis's last submission, that came off of Newton trying to drag himself up along the fence. And a lot of that fight was just riding on Newton as he was trying to get up. So it'll be interesting to see how those styles match up, because you don't see a lot of tip-top guard players. And you certainly don't get that tip-top guard player versus wrestler matchup all that often anymore. So guys like Phil Davis have been working on dragging guys back to the ground, because that's the wall walk and the get-up are becoming the main thing in the bottom game of MMA. I haven't really seen Phil Davis in with a guy with a, who is there in the light heavyweight division who's famous for the submissions from his guard, And you saw that in John Jones versus Vitor Belfort. The Vitor Belfort panic tactic of pulling guard whenever you run out of ideas suddenly worked, because who attempts submissions off their back anymore, And they're normally things like the arm push triangle. They're not like clever, wily setups. And there's certainly no guys who'll sort of let you half past their guard just to attempt a submission. And that's what makes Liam McGeary so interesting. No matter how stilted his stand-up is, no matter if he can take these guys down or not, he has this incredible bottom game, and that just doesn't exist at the highest levels of light heavyweight MMA anymore. This will be the test of whether it actually does, because this is the highest level opponent that he's fought since Manny Newton, I think. Yeah, I mean, Manny Newton, and then there's just nobody else of note on his record except Tito Ortiz, and Tito Ortiz is not really of note in 2016. Anyway, that's the big fights done for this weekend. Next week we'll be looking at Alvarez versus McGregor in great detail. I'll have loads of stills up and shit like that. But now we're going to do a little segment I call Fight of the Week, which is just a fight I saw, which I think you guys should check out. It's always going to be a bit of an obscure one, I hope. Or it might just be a weird one. I don't know if you saw this. Minoru Kimura, or Philip Kimura, whatever they want to call him, the Brazilian kickboxer who they were trying to get over hard in Japan. They put him against Charles Crazy Horse Bennett in his debut in Rising in MMA. And he got knocked out in seconds. And now they're giving him a rematch. Just like, why? But his last loss in kickboxing came to my boy Masaki Noiri, who I'm always vaunting for his interesting kicking game and really creative knee strikes. They come in on weird arcs and shit like that. And this fight is just absolutely cracking. Noiri comes out and he's throwing that non-committal right leg low kick that I was talking about, where he doesn't even really pivot on his standing leg that much. It's just straight out and back, almost like a one-legged kick. And then he's throwing push kicks with the lead foot, ball of the foot into the lead thigh of Kimura, and then he starts throwing the front snap kick with the lead leg and the triangle kick coming up on the diagonal with the lead leg. And they really don't look like much, but they're so quick, and it's such a small point that you're putting pressure through. Pressure points way. Now, such a small point you're putting force through. They can really dig in and cause some damage. And he starts winding Kimura with these, and then suddenly he flows one into a right knee up the center of the guard, puts Kimura down. Then he starts working the body again, throws another good front kick, another good snap kick with the ball of his foot into the midsection, and then he follows up with a right knee to the midsection, puts him down for the count. It was very good. Go watch that fight because it's awesome. That's my fight of the week. Masaki Noiri versus Minoru Kimura. Right, let's do some questions. Hello Jack, big fan here. Since I think you're the best analyst in the sport and have quite a way with words, I'd love to hear you deliver a eulogy for my boy Tatsuya Kawajiri's Major Leagues career, now that he's going home to Rizin. By this I mean remembering his strengths and what he brought to the table, his major moments, be they wins or losses in the UFC or elsewhere, and especially what he could have done to do better, similar to the Lesnar hacks article you wrote. Oh yeah, go read that, it's good. Bit of an ample question, perhaps more suited to for a written piece, but I'd love to hear your take on him. Love the podcast, hope that you get that gig as UFC matchmaker. Yeah, I was angling for that gig this week. It'd be a fun one, I reckon. Just negotiating with people and telling them that they can have 20 and 20 or leave. Sorry, that's from Johnny V. Yeah, Tatsuya Kawajiri is heading back to Japan to Rizin. The thing with Kawajiri is exactly the same thing as with Takanori Gomi, Kid Yamamoto. Japanese stars stayed in Japan when Pride collapsed. Well, to be fair, Yamamoto never actually got to Pride. He was a K1 star. K1 Heroes, that is. But after those organizations sort of faltered, they both stayed in Japan. Gomi with World Victory Road, and then Shuto for some reason. I don't know why you'd go to Shuto. I don't think they have any money. Yamamoto with Dream, because they sold tickets there, and the UFC brought them over with significant losses in their recent history. They were both on pretty bad slides by the time they came over, and the UFC kept them around because that's preemptively not allowing Japanese promotions to have a big star to sell tickets. I mean, Kid Yamamoto's not won a fight in years and years and years, and they still keep him around. And Gomi's lost to just about everyone except Tyson Griffin. He had a good showing against Isaac Valley Flag, and he got robbed against Diego Sanchez, because that's what happens when you fight Diego Sanchez. But most of the time, he's just getting beaten up now. And Kawajiri was in the same boat. He came over very late in his career. But to his credit, he actually did fairly well. He beat up Dennis Seaver, and his fight with Cub Swanson was really good, actually. I enjoyed that. Except that he was doing the Dong Hyun Kim thing, where he had one super unpredictable attack that he then beat into the ground, so that it wasn't at all unpredictable. He was running back fisting all the time. But the real strength of Kawajiri was his wrestling. Everyone knows that. I mean, they called him the Crusher because of his ground and pound, but it was never that impressive on the big stages. It was more in Shuto that he was impressive with it. Shuto's always been a weird one because they don't let you elbow or anything like that, but they will let you punch the back of the head, heal the kidneys from guard, and stamp on the belly of the opponent from above them. So they got some weird rules there, or they always did have some weird refereeing at any rate. Kawajiri always hit really hard, but he fell into the trap of thinking that he was a really good striker just because he could hit really hard. If you saw his match against Masato, back when Masato was taking a couple of tune-ups against MMA fighters, it was Masato versus Kawajiri and Masato versus Jay-Z Calvacanti, whatever he is. I think they'd call him Jay-Z Calzan in Japan. Jay-Z Calzone. Oh, I'm hungry now. Yeah, but basically Masato was taking tune-ups against MMA fighters, because Masato was an incredible fighter. I mean, if you've not watched Masato, go watch Masato. He's fucking incredible. But he was always a decision fighter. He very rarely knocked guys out, but he battered MMA fighters. I mean, the big loss of Kawajiri's career was when he came from Shuto to Pride to take part in that enormous Pride tournament. It was the Bushido 9, I believe, tournament, the lightweight tournament. And I think he met Gomi in the first round, which is a rough pick because that's the top lightweight in the world at the time, or would go on to be. And their fight was just incredible. It was 10-minute first round, back and forth, Gomi starts to work the body, finally wilts Kawajiri, gets on his back, pounds him out, chokes him. One of my favourite fights ever. Gomi looked so good in that fight, and so good in that tournament generally. And this was when no one was throwing any body shots in MMA, so I was just sat there with my mouth open going, yes! Kawajiri obviously suffered that really rough loss to Shinya Aoki, where Aoki, the dickhead that he is, said he was looking for an open fracture on Kawajiri's ankle. Just bringing up his record now, because it's quite sad. I only remember him getting the shit kicked out of him in those big fights. Oh god, the fight with Eddie Alvarez was insane. Eddie Alvarez had about 3 Fight of the Year contenders in that Dream tournament. Oh yeah, he arm triangled Joachim Hansen at Dream 17. I completely forgot about that. I mean, Joachim had a bit of a hard decline, but solid submission win there. What I always liked about Kawajiri was that I felt he was incredibly strong once he was down on his knees pursuing the takedown. We talked about this back in, might have been like episode 2, Swanson versus Kawajiri. He's hanging on to Kawajiri's ankle. He's got his leg hooked around it, and he's down, sort of all his momentum stopped, and he can still come up and pick up the guy. Or what he did against Swanson was throw him forward onto his hands so that he could go to Swanson's back. It was really quite cool. If I could do anything to make Kawajiri better, it would be to teach him to low kick really hard, throw the overhand, and not worry about any other striking. Just do that. Don't do spinning shit. Don't run in swinging. Just kick the legs, throw the overhand when it's there, duck in on takedowns whenever they start defending themselves. Because on the ground, he was a monster. His top game was just crushing. Well, they called him the Crusher, but it was really suffocating top game. Good evening, Jack. Obligatory thank you for dramatically improving my sparring with your articles. Oh, thank you. More buttering up. On to my question. There we are. You have been giving a lot of love to feints in a number of articles and some of your podcasts. What kinds of things can fighters do successfully on a consistent basis to counter opponents who use a lot of feints? Thanks. From Eric. I think one of the things that you have to realise is that feinting is sort of an outside game. Feinting is at its best when your opponent has time to react. You're trying to make the most of their reactions. So doing it from in close and things like that, there are in-fighting feints and things and so on. But if you're crowding someone and they start feinting at you, it doesn't really matter that much. Feints are sort of out in the open. I'm going to come in, but I didn't, but now I am. So the feinting game is more of an outside game, whereas, well, the traditional feinting game that we know is an outside game. The thing about feints is that you're playing to your opponent's reactions. If you're feinting too quick for them to see, your feint is worthless. So you're working at their level, as opposed to if you were just outright leading. You want to be faster than them. So feinting is generally useful because it opens the opponent up more. You can use their reactions to land more important strikes through more important openings. Whereas leading, you're sort of rushing to get the blow off before their hand comes across or their guard comes up, and you'll get like the flicking connections and gliding off them and things like that. But one of the best ways that you can shut down someone who has a really good feinting game is just crowd them. The most underrated weapon in the world is either the ropes or the fence, depending on what you're fighting in. Start putting people towards those. They don't have the time to work. Feinting is an outside game. It takes time. It's about setups and throwing enough static out there that the real strikes are well hidden. If you put the opponent on the fence or the ropes or near the fence or the ropes, you put the ticking clock on them. They don't have time to pick their openings to say, I'm going to feint this time, I'm going to feint the next time, and then I'm going to step in. And once you start crowding someone, if you just keep your guard up the whole time and they're near the fence or the ropes to begin with, as soon as they throw the real strike, which you can normally panic out of them by pushing them towards the ropes or fence, as soon as they throw the real strike and it bounces off your guard or the top of your head or whatnot, you're in attacking them. Feints are a manipulation of, time and space, I suppose. The old saying that they used back in fixed time was time and measure. If you don't give them time to work or space to measure, you can really mess with their ability to use the same against you. Slack. High praise and all that shit. Oh, thank you. Why is Connor's BJJ severely underrated and overlooked? Listen, I know his guard was sliced like butter to Mendez and Diaz clobbered him. However, to what degree are these viable conclusions that his BJJ is total shit. Having a torn ACL at the beginning of a camp, not being able to drill wrestling defense, or being able to grapple at all, would have been just a major hindrance to one's camp. In addition, Mendes was a short-notice opponent, and it seriously looked like he just said fuck it, and didn't give a shit about walking into those takedowns. Against Diaz, the guy was rocked and exhausted. Now, these sound like excuses, they do a little bit, but they seem like pretty good excuses, especially when you compare those performances to early Cage Warriors or Dennis Siver, Max Holloway. I'm not saying that he's a grappling genius. I entirely expected Alvarez to take Conor down, but he's not the fish out of water on the mat. Thoughts from Tyler? I mean, we're going to talk about Alvarez versus McGregor extensively next week. I don't want to, blow my load here, but I mean, I've been having to watch a lot of McGregor recently anyway, and I did watch the Mendes fight the other night, and knowing that his knee was shagged coming into that, it's very interesting. His backstep counters were just completely off. The McGregor standard is to come forward, hit the body, hit the head. As soon as they come back at you, you skip back and throw the left hand. And every time he skipped back, he was too slow and he got clobbered by Mendes. So I'm very ready to believe that his knee wasn't up to the task of what he usually did. I mean, watching that fight again, he got battered. By the end, he is exhausted and he's not talking. He's just nodding his head or shaking his head, depending on what Mendes has hit him with most recently. His guard did look fairly mediocre in that, but Mendes looked mediocre too. It was a really ugly fight. It was in the trenches sort of stuff. Mendes was pushing his hand into his mouth, trying to cover the chin, the old Dan Henderson. And I really liked McGregor's elbows from the guard, the downward ones to the top of the head. They were both shouting at the referee a lot. Mendes was putting his fingers in the cut and just rubbing his hands all over McGregor's face. And McGregor was elbowing the top of the head, and Mendes was convinced that was the back of the head, and Herb Dean was having to tell both of them off and be like, stop talking to me. But the downward they're not really downwards, but downwards from above his head, that is, on Mendes. Those elbows from McGregor really bothered him, because he was trying to hold the underhooks and keep his head underneath McGregor's from close guard. And you'll notice as soon as those elbows start hurting him, he starts putting his elbows on the outside of McGregor's arms so that he's pinning them down, not allowing McGregor to raise the arms above his head and bring the elbows in. But the punches that Mendes did land and the elbows that Mendes did land were really solid blows from inside the guard. He just didn't really get to work as much as he should have. He was very obviously tired by the second round. I mean, if he hadn't gone for that guillotine, he'd probably have dominated the second round, because that was, I think it was the last 40 seconds he went for that guillotine, and then McGregor got up and knocked him out. I mean, the Gracies did a breakdown on this, and they were like, oh, it's the grip breaking, that's what exhausted Mendes. To be honest, it just looked like Mendes was exhausted anyway, and he was laying flat on McGregor in the guard. But I do think it's disingenuous to say that his guard's rubbish, that his BJJ's rubbish. It's the same thing as saying someone's striking is rubbish, or someone's wrestling is rubbish. There are areas within someone's game that are better than others. So McGregor's closed guard could well be fairly mediocre. I've not seen anything impressive from his closed guard, but there's very few guys who are impressive from their closed guard. His top game looked pretty good against Max Holloway, who is, by no means a slouch. Obviously, that was fairly early Max Holloway. Holloway's come on in leaps and bounds since then. We could talk about the X-guard sweep against against Nate Diaz, which was neat. And he was. People do harp on about this white belt stuff too much regarding the Nate Diaz fight. If you think that first Nate Diaz fight was won on the ground, you're wrong. It was won on the feet, and then the ground was just a wobbled guy who didn't have as much jiu-jitsu experience getting submitted by a not wobbled guy with more jiu-jitsu experience. And McGregor's leg drag to mount transition against Dennis Siver is the one we all remember, which was pretty cool. And then there was him defending the knee bar from Diego Brandao. I mean, those are the real significant moments on the ground that we've seen of McGregor in the UFC. But we are still in the situation where he's only fought one decent wrestler. He spent most of the fight underneath him, and he benefited enormously from that wrestler gassing out and making mistakes. Putting him in with someone like Alvarez is very interesting in that regard. Alvarez is really more known for his striking, but obviously a very competent wrestler. They would desperately not want the Khabib match, because as awful as Khabib is on the feet most of the time, he's just relentless wrestling. And I suspect he'd be a really tough matchup for McGregor. But, McGregor's training with great guys. He's got Dylan Dennis over there, and he trains with John Kavanagh, who is excellent. I mean, I've seen footage of Kavanagh competing back in the day against guys like Ollie Geddes, and he's really solid, brilliant jiu-jitsu player. And Paddy Houlihan's over there, who's also brilliant. I think whenever you say someone's jiu-jitsu is rubbish or weak or anything like that, you're looking at a very small window of McGregor. Because he hasn't been to the ground much. We haven't seen much of him on the ground. You're working with what he did when he was wobbled against Nate Diaz and being trapped under Chad Mendes. So this is one of the things that makes McGregor so interesting, is that he's very much an unknown on the ground still. And getting the title so quickly and becoming such a media sensation has allowed him to pursue the fights that he wants, rather than the very difficult fights that would test that grappling. But yeah, not shit by any means. This isn't like Phil Baroni back in the day or someone like that. We'll talk about this more next week when we're talking about all the stuff with Alvarez versus McGregor. But anytime someone says that McGregor's ground game is awful, just treat it exactly the same way as when someone says, "Oh, no one can take that left hand." It's just bollocks. It's an absolute statement, and it's not much help to anyone. Hi, Jack. Do you think we will ever see a great axe kicker come into MMA and be successful? It seems strange to me that Andy Hug showed how effective it can be in kickboxing, yet is extremely rare in the octagon. Cheers, from Lewis. I don't know if we will see one, but we could see one. In the same way that I can't think of another effective axe kicker in kickboxing except Andy Hug. That's where we are with that. I mean, he's the only guy who really had a game that actually benefited from the axe kick being in it, and could actually land it efficiently, consistently, and with power, and built off of that and landed body kicks and stuff. John Jones will throw the occasional one, but it's not really benefiting his game in any way to do that. And most people, if they threw one, it would just be a flashy opening for a takedown, mainly. I think you're less likely to see it in MMA because, even Andy Hug, who was amazing at them, fell over a lot when doing things like that. Kickboxing is good in that it protects you from that if you fall over. You get the chance to stand back up and then you're back to action. But what was special about Andy Hug was that he was not only an incredibly dexterous kicker, but he was also a very powerful kicker. If you brought in like a top-level Olympic taekwondo player, they'd be able to axe kick, but the axe kick would be useless almost. If you see the axe kicks in taekwondo, generally they're like these slappy things, and they're not going to be much use to anyone. If you look at the size of Andy Hug's legs, he was huge into his Olympic lifts. If you don't have very strong hamstrings, as soon as you kick someone full power with an axe kick, you're going to bust up your knee. I don't think there's many guys in the world who have put that much time into axe kicking, have the physique, have the hamstring strength, have the flexibility, and certainly it's going to be very difficult to find guys like that who are also ready to come, put in the hours and train MMA and come over. It was a huge deal when Andy Hug went from Kyokushin karate to kickboxing. That was a massive transition. To do the same from some kind of kicking sport like that and go into MMA is even bigger. It's one of those things that it's not impossible because someone could pursue that path, but it is also one of those things where getting proficient with that technique takes so much time that it's easier to just learn other things, the more orthodox stuff, and certainly less risky stuff. So I wouldn't write it off, but I would say, we are 30, 40 years into kickboxing, and there's only been one great axe kicker. I reckon that'll do us for this week. Send your emails to fightsgoneby@gmail.com. Love getting those. Always fun to respond to those. If you have some money to throw away and you want to see the 4 Pillars of Pugilism bonus episodes, head over to Patreon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tell everyone and their mum about the podcast for next week. It's going to be a big one. And most of all, enjoy the fights this weekend. I'm Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast. Cheers.